All right, everybody, this is Sheets, and I'm going to be going over the NASCAR tournament, which is just in a couple of hours, hopefully. There was some rain issues, possibly, and I guess it still could rain out, but I'm operating under the assumption that it does not rain. So let me talk to you about NASCAR for a little bit. For those of you that saw my tweet, you'll know kind of what I'm getting at. The two big contests that are going on this weekend are, well, unless you're an MMA fan, are going to be NASCAR and the PGA tournament. And I never really got into golf as far as DFS goes, and couldn't quite figure out why. And for whatever reason, I really become drawn to NASCAR. And why do you think that is? And I struggled with this for a while, but I think I finally figured it out. I don't particularly like either sport as far as watching it for a DFS sweat. In other words, golf, to sweat it for 4 days, to me is kind of torture. And that's not even the point. NASCAR, again, it's a much easier sweat. It's like 3 hours and gets kind of exciting. So, but that's not even the reason. I think the reason why I find NASCAR that much more appealing than DraftKings than golf is this. Remember, I'm originally a portfolio manager, and what draws me to DFS is not as much the picking of the players, which is obviously interesting, but actually the creating of the lineups and the way in which you can make a combination of ownership decisions and play effectiveness decisions to make lineups. And also what's very interesting to me is the concept of correlation. And, that's why, one of these days I'll talk to you about my stock market approach and things like that. But so much of building good portfolios is not necessarily just picking the best players, or the best stocks, but picking those stocks or players that work well with one another. Okay. And I think the reason why golf just is not really appealing to me is there's very little with respect to correlation when it comes to golf. It's very similar to MMA, right? So, if you pick your 6 favorite MMA players, like one has nothing to do, or competitors, or one person's result has nothing to do with the other, right? So you really just have to pick the 6 best players relative to salary and ownership and all that stuff. But when it comes to other sports like baseball and basketball, football as well, there's certain correlations between players, which adds that kind of layer of interest as far as I'm concerned. And that's why golf just doesn't really do it for me, is because, okay, you can certainly create correlation. I talked about this in the golf video that we did, is I guess you could consider guys that are from the same group as being correlated because they're operating with the same weather. Maybe they could read each other's putt lines a little bit more clearly. If one guy's on a good line, another putter in the same group can capitalize on that, but it's very, very slim, if anything. But what's cool about NASCAR is I think there is a really neat bit of correlation that's involved. And also the way you have to create lineups, you really have to pick from drivers that fit certain molds. And how you build your lineups depends on the characteristic of the track, and how you pick certain parts of your lineup is determined by how you pick other parts of your lineups. And we're going to get to that. And again, this is too beginnerish for some of you. I apologize, but this is the way it goes through my head as I kind of analyze this type of sport and this type of activity. So let's start with this. Here's another analogy, which almost none of you are going to get, as we talk about this particular race at this particular track. As you guys may or may not know, I'm a big horse racing aficionado, going back a long way. And where I got my original start with horse racing and horse race betting was in harness racing. And I grew up in New Jersey near the Meadowlands, which the Meadowlands is a long 1 mile track with 2 kind of, semi-tight turns, but you have these big, long straightaways. And the races were only 1 lap around, okay? Now, you compare that to a lot of other tracks, and we'll take Yonkers Raceway, which was the local New York track, which was only 15, 20 minutes away from me. And that was a half-mile track. And it required the horses to go 2 laps around and very short straightaways, okay? By the time you got any momentum going in a straightaway, you had to deal with a turn again. So what the way that both of those tracks kind of played were completely different. Like if you were at the Meadowlands and you were on the outside and, you know, you started off from behind, for example, you had a full stretch straightaway down the back stretch where you can make up ground, and you had a full long stretch to make up ground as well. So it wasn't that big of a deal if you didn't get away too well. You can get away 8th out of a 10-place field, and as long as you were a good enough horse, it wasn't really that big of a deal to sweep past everybody. You had plenty of chances to do it. On the other hand, at Yonkers Raceway in New York, when you have these short stretches into these tight turns, okay, it became very difficult to pass anybody, okay? And it became almost impossible, I wouldn't say impossible, to pass a lot of people, because by the time you got any kind of passing momentum going, you were into that next turn already, and you were just dead. So the characteristics of both tracks were really different. Like at Yonkers, if you had the rail and you had speed, you could get out there and just impose your will right from the beginning, and you had a really big advantage, okay? Whereas at the Meadowlands, if you were on the inside and you could get the lead right away, well, you certainly have some advantage, but it's almost nothing compared to the advantage you have in a short track, okay? So the way you'd handicap a race at the Meadowlands was totally different than the way you'd handicap a race over at Yonkers. So that's very similar to what goes on in NASCAR, because sometimes there are tracks that have big, long stretches, right? And sometimes there are tracks that are very short stretches and just, you know, just tighter turns, and just kind of the shape of the oval is just different. So what that means is, first of all, a couple of things, is that number one, when you're at a track that is conducive to not being able to make up a lot of grounds, then you want to play more guys that are starting near the front, right? Because the guys that are starting in the back just really don't have much of a shot, okay? The other thing that it kind of goes along, actually I'm just kind of saying the same thing, but the shorter the track is, right, considering that all races are pretty much the same distance, the shorter the track is, then the more laps you have to race on it, right? And that makes perfect sense. Like, go back to harness racing. It's a mile race. If you have a mile track, it's just 1 lap. If it's a half-mile track, it's 2 laps. And the way that NASCAR DFS distributes points is they assign a lot of points for what, you know, a lot of people call dominator points, which are points for laps led, okay, and fastest laps. So the one common denominator between fastest lap and laps led is the laps. So like the more laps that you have at your disposal, the more points for that type of component of your score are available to you. So that's all a long way of probably saying what a lot of you kind of advanced and NASCAR experts knew already, is that sometimes these dominator points are just more important than in other races, okay? So with all that said, this is one of those tracks, this is one of those races where there are just so many more dominator points available because of the number of laps. And also, you know, it kind of goes hand in hand that, you know, the less laps, in other words, the shorter track, the harder it is to pass. You really want to be in those first places to get those dominator points. Now, that's one thing to keep in mind. But the other thing is, again, you know, only one guy can lead at any time, right? So if you just take these dominator guys and you just pick a guy, you know, that's starting 4th and he never gets to the front, then you're kind of in a tough situation because you're not leading laps. You're usually not running the fastest laps. So you're not getting those points. You don't have a lot of ability to get place differential points. All you're really relying on then is your ability to finish, right, within that kind of, you know, top 5, top 10 or whatever, which is good. But, you know, if you just play the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guy, it's really difficult for them to run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So this is why this is all really, really interesting to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, number one, my player pool, and number two, I'm going to actually go over my big lineup. I might change this, but I did play for a decent amount of money today, and I decided that's what I was going to do. I couldn't really get into it with respect to NASCAR and DFS and golf, for example. I just decided I was going to push myself and play for too much money, and maybe that will freaking motivate me to really figure this out. And I'm kind of pumped with the way with my process for this, and I'll share it with you, and hopefully you guys can learn at least the way I think about it. So what I did on the right here is I have this. This is my very fancy player pool, right, and my really fancy abbreviations. So this is kind of my player pool, and you guys can determine for yourself whether this is too much or too little. I guess this is about half the field I'm using, pretty much. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to be going into the big one, which is, well, for me, the big one is a 400. And I've never played a 400 at NASCAR. Okay, I'm going to be playing this one and be playing a bunch of the not milli makers, whatever, the smaller buy-ins also. But I am going to be playing this one as well. So this is my approach. All right, as we go through here, I'll just tell you what my abbreviations are. I wanted to identify of my player pool the dominators, meaning the guys that are going to be near the front. And I wanted to make sure that I got at least 2, maybe as many as 4 in my lineups, okay? The other way I characterize these guys is by, I put a P next to them if they were place differential plays. That means that they are good plays to just pick up place differential points if they're starting 25th, 30th, whatever it is, to pick up points that way. And the third group, which I put an M, which I call middling. And these are the guys that are not close enough to the beginning to really rate to get that many dominator points, not as far enough back that rate to get that many place differential points, but can kind of get a combination of both. And I feel as though that this group is often a group that gets kind of left by the wayside with respect to ownership and things like that. So I'm trying to make that group kind of separate in my head. The other thing I want to focus in on is not to be too chalky, right? Because I'm going to show you what the chalky build today is going to be. But one of the things I kind of just noted here is whether there is a guy who is going to be extreme chalk or low owned or just no real bias, right? So if there's a C next to them, I consider them chalky. If there's an L next to them, I consider them low owned. And if there's no indication, I consider them around 20%, right? Just not extremely chalky, not extremely low owned. So like, for example, you'll see Blaney, chalky dominator. De Benedetto would be a middling guy with, not that chalky, not that popular. Newman, for example, would be a low-owned middling guy, right? Truex, I put CCD, meaning he's extremely chalky dominator. I should have put that by Blaney also, by the way. Again, this is my own way of thinking about it. So one thing I always have to remember when I'm going to play above what I usually play is to not be tempted to be too chalky, right? And you guys, I think you guys know where I'm coming from here. Whenever you're playing a poker tournament or anything where you're playing kind of above what you're used to playing, it's the natural inclination to just be a little too tight. So I have to kind of fight that. So I'm really going to make sure that while I don't just pitch and, just punt and play terrible plays, I want to make sure that I'm playing, at least some degree of differentiating lineup, right? So, like, for example, like this, the chalk lineups are going to be some combination of these chalky dominators, such as Blaney. And Blaney, by the way, Blaney's a tremendous play. I mean, he's really cheap. He's like, what is he, 8,800 or something like that? 8,400, and he's got the pole. So he could just get right out there and blast and just open up and just bury people, okay? So he's going to be extremely chalky. Not that he's a bad play, but you just have to go into it knowing that he's going to be pretty chalky. So that if you do play him, I would play him, with some lower owned guys. And so what people are going to do is they're going to probably play 3 of these chalky dominators, which is going to be Blaney, Busch, Kyle Busch, Truex, Keselowski, right? Those types of guys. And another guy that is going to be really popular, I think, is going to be Denny Hamlin, because Denny Hamlin is a middling guy, but he's gonna. But I didn't put him chalky for now, but he's just that type of guy that people are gonna say, boy, I can get place differential points, and I could probably get to the front. You know, so he's a guy that people are gonna play also. And you'll see that you could play Hamlin with two of these other, you know, chalky dominators, especially if you use Blaney, and leave yourself room to play kind of chalky, good place differential plays, which is going to be guys like Pierce Priest, however you pronounce it. Priest is going to be popular. Maybe even what's his name, McDowell might be somewhat popular. So these guys are going to be kind of, you know, it's easy to get these, you know, your chalky dominators in if you play guys like Priest and McDowell and Busher, Bell, guys like that. So that's where I think a lot of the lineups are going to come from. So what I'm going to be trying to do is avoid that. Okay, I don't want to have lineups where I have the three chalky dominators, and maybe Pierce and, you know, Priest and McDowell, or Priest and Busher, or Priest and you know, Cole Custer, guys like that. And I think that's kind of my approach to this. So, for example, this is kind of my main build, kind of right off the bat. This is kind of my process. So where are my dominators going to come from? So what I wanted to do was I wanted to get at least one low-owned dominator that I like, that's in my player pool, and it's going to be Boyer. He's going to be one guy that's in there. Logano, I felt as though is not that chalky, so I'm going to put him in. And while Kyle Busch is somewhat chalky, what this is doing is the three dominators I'm taking fade Truex, Keselowski, and Blaney. Okay. Now, by the way, my opinion on these guys is this: if I had to toss or underweight two of the guys, it would be Truex and it would be Keselowski. And the reason why is Truex, I mean, again, to me, this is what I've been watching over the last 3, 4, or 5 weeks or whatever. He just doesn't seem to have it. You know what I mean? That's the best way I could describe it. I mean, there's been several different races where his car has just not done anything. And I think last week he led some laps or whatever it is. But I think that Truex's name value and popularity is just going to make him a little bit overowned. And Keselowski, again, he has, hey, call it what it is. He's won a couple of races and he's been in there. The fact is he has gotten somewhat lucky, right? In two of the races fell apart ahead of him. So for me, I mean, while I certainly think he's a solid play, I think that he's one of the guys that I would be less weighted on. And since these are going to be the two of the most popular guys, I have no problem not making them part of my bigger lineup. So, like, for example, if I go with Logano and Busch, who I think are just as good as those others, and throw in Boyer, I think I have a pretty differentiated group of dominators here, right? So the next thing I want to do is I have to figure out what to do with the rest of my lineups. And what you see here is I avoided all of that, you know, popular place differential chalk, right? That being Priest, that being Custer, that being McDowell. Also Busher, kind of guys like that. And again, I'm not saying you have to play this way, but this is what makes sense to me, to make decent plays that are low owns, and that's going to be fading like a lot of the chalky builds. So I really like this. Now, this last spot here, Austin Dillon, I'm willing to pay attention to this. So what's going on here is that Austin Dillon is on baby watch. His wife is due to give birth, whether it be today, tomorrow, whatever. And there's talk about he might not race, or if he does race, there's talk he might actually like leave the race in the middle, or maybe after one of the stages to go be with his wife. Now we could speculate on whether that's going to actually happen, but you know, there are two ways, first of all, to look at this narrative. You want to go down narrative street. Number one, and this, you can go either way. One is, boy, what a great story it would be if he freaking won this thing for his new baby, right? Or with his wife just waiting in the hospital. You know, on the other hand, you can say, boy, maybe he's just not going to take too many chances. Maybe he's going to, you know, he sees a baby coming. He feels a little more scared that he's risking his life. He doesn't want to make that move on the turn if he has to. I don't know. I'm kind of into it. But what I'm also into is the idea that if he starts the race and gets replaced, then he's going to be replaced by AJ Allmendinger, who's not bad, and he actually has good track history here. And you actually get those points, right? If Dillon begins the race, then you get the Allmendinger points also. So I think, first of all, that not everybody understands that, even though it's put right here in the DraftKings banner. I saw in some of the discords people actually like arguing over whether this is the case. Okay, what is the case? What makes it risky is if he doesn't start at all, then Allmendinger gets the points, right? But if Dillon starts, then you get the entire car, right? And I just don't know if anybody really is going to go for this, right? I think that it's going to be a really low-owned attempt, and I'm going to try it, I think. So this is kind of where I'm starting. So you look at the construct of this lineup. You have 3 dominators, right? You don't have the chalky Blaney. You don't have the chalky Kozlowski. You don't even have the chalky Truex. And then you have these middling guys, Byron and Newman, who, again, I think are, this whole range. When I say this range, I don't even mean this price range. I mean this starting position range is going to be pretty ignored, right? So this is what I think I'm going to end up doing, right? Now, just to show you a couple of other ways that you can go here is, let's say that, I don't know, you didn't want to go with Dillon, right? There are a couple of ways that you can go. Like this one really is appealing to me. So if you want, you could play Almirola as a 4th dominator. Okay, now Almirola is very cheap. He's very low owned. And remember the nature of this track, right? So Blaney's got the pole. Almirola's got the 2, right? Now you think about this. If right out of the gate, somehow Almirola just gets in front and just starts rolling and gets some clean air and gets some, and just gets, I don't want to say lucky, but just his car just starts rolling, you could get a guy at 6,400 that just leads laps and just amasses dominator points right out of the gate. And there was a guy who was at Eck last week, very similar. He had the pole at 6,400. He generated a lot of dominator points. And Almirola, as a low-owned alternative, you could certainly go ahead and do that, right? So this is, again, this could be one of the lineups I put in one of my Millie Maker. I call it the Millie Maker, meaning that it's just the lower buy-in, high variance, lots of entries tournament. So the other thing you could do, again, if you wanted, if you thought this was a little bit too whatever, too chancy, what could you do if you put in Blaney, right? So if you put in Blaney over here, okay, then what you could do, and you don't want to have all these guys, is you could take some more shots at this kind of mid-range. So now is where you could play somebody, another real low-owned guy like Kenseth, right? Now, this one leaves 700 on the table. So let's say you thought that Boyer was, a little bit too fishy. Actually, Boyer's probably my best option in here. So Boyer would be fine. But I'm trying to see if maybe you can get up to maybe one of these other guys like Hamlin. So let's just say that instead of this, you went up to Denny Hamlin. Okay. Kept Newman, kept Kenseth. Now you can go down to one of these clowns, right? You could come back with Dillon, for example. Okay. So you see what we just did, basically? We replaced Logano with Blaney, and we replaced Busch with Hamlin, okay? Now we only have 2 dominators, but we have such differentiation here, right? So we're now just rooting for Chalk Blaney to blast, okay? Boyer to kind of hang around and hang in there. And these guys take this middling range and just kind of just go for it, right? So it's this is going to be a tough one. Like this would be a kind of a I keep saying Millie Maker. This could be more of a large field type deal. Okay. Let me pull up my player pool again, because I do want to identify some of these other guys that I like to put into these, you know, to put into some of these lineups. Like, for example, let me get all my lineups up here. Okay. So let's pull up my lineups. We'll do it obviously by sport. Sport, golf. Come on, guys. Okay. So like you look through some of these lineups and they look sort of chalky, I guess, right? Hamlin, Busch, Logano, Jones, Busch, and McDowell. I mean, I guess that's kind of okay. But guys like Stenhouse are kind of appealing to me. So like you take a lineup like this, let's say that you wanted to de-chalkify this a little bit. If you wanted to just put in Stenhouse, which again is kind of a, you know, for lack of a better term, kind of a middling type position, right? This in and of itself makes this kind of a different type of lineup, right? You do have the two it's a little chalky that you have two dominators, but again, you don't have the chalkiest ones. You don't have Keselowski, you don't have Blaney, and you could play your Hamlin. And again, you could even be a little chalky with these place differential guys, but because you have Stenhouse, right, that really makes it work. Okay. So let me just review some of these other guys as well. Again, you could just look through this. I mean, this is nothing particularly off the wall about any of these plays. Although I will say that Sorensen, I think, is probably good. So what I'm going to do, by the way, in some of my chalkier lineups that I have McDowell in, like where's a good McDowell lineup? That's just a little too chalky. Let's just find one. No, that one's okay. Okay, so this one, for example. So this one that has Hamlin, Logano, Blaney in it, right? This is one where I can't take all this chalk. I can't have Custer and McDowell. So what I can do is, this is one where I can replace it with Sorensen. So we'll place McDowell with Sorensen over here and just hope that he just does enough. Because McDowell does have a reputation for being a little over aggressive, so he might, he might wreck or anything could happen. This one is fine. I'm just looking at some of these to see if any of them are really too chalky. All right, so this one isn't that great, right? This one isn't that bad. And that's what I'm going to end up doing. I'm going to go through all these lineups and see if I can't just de-chalkify these a little bit. Because again, what I have here is one in the 400 or whatever that is, and the rest are these lineups that really need max differentiation. So I'm going to have to go through and, put some Almirola in, put maybe some more Byron in, things like that. Boyer, I think at 44%, I think probably have too much of him, okay? But even still, even though I have Blaney as my top-owned guy, I don't think that any of these Blaney lineups are particularly chalky. And again, I guess the reason why is because of this. I think I've really taken a stand on this Truex Keselowski business. I just feel as though that their popularity is just not something I want to chase. I think they're fine, but I have just no problem just taking a stand on Logano over both those guys, and Blaney certainly over both those guys. And Boyer is going to be, one of my, one of my low-owned or lower-owned dominators. And I think I'm going to try to get a little more Almirola in also. Again, all you need is to get to the front and start leading laps. And he's starting number 2. He's not that bad. So you get enough dominator points and you hang in there. Maybe you get 7th or something like that. That's going to be fine. So, like Priest, look at this one. This one might be a little bit too chalky, right? So what can we do about this? So the way I do it is, okay, if there's Eric Jones, I have probably way too much of him. And here's another one where maybe I'll take one of these lower owned guys like Stenhouse or Kenseth, for example. So let's just take a look at Stenhouse 6,700. Okay. Then I got Busch, Hamlin, Blaney. I could drop down from Newman a little bit or drop down from Pierce. Actually, dropping down from Pierce is going to be difficult. So here, this is what I can do here. Here I can go for a low-owned Almirola. And I can get 1, 2, oh, this is actually not bad. Because I get Almirola and Stenhouse is kind of like my differentiators in there. So this is going to take a little more work, but that's kind of the idea. So let me just review again. Let me just go back to my main one. I guess the best way I can do it is, where's my Austin Dillon? Okay. So let me just look at this again. So another thing you could do, if you don't like Dillon, I could keep the same lineup and, again, just change to Almirola. Now, this is really, really aggressive because you have 4 dominators and none of them have Blaney or Keselowski or Truex, right? If you wanted to be a little less aggressive, you could put Cole Custer in instead of Dillon. And what that does for you, while Cole Custer in and of itself is going to be more popular, I think that leaving 500 on the table kind of makes this lineup differentiating. And likewise, let's say that you wanted to put Preece in instead. While Preece is going to be higher owned than Dillon, the fact that you're going to leave 700 on the table with this makes this pretty intriguing, right? So that is one thing I might do is maybe do a couple lineups with this main 5 and just kind of just go 1-1-1. And again, that's probably a little too aggressive considering how many lineups I'm playing, but you know what? Whatever. I guess that's pretty much about it. I hope this is helpful. Hope this at least shows you, if not the way to think about things, at least gives you an idea of the way I think about things. And let's go. I'm really into this. I'm really into NASCAR, really into the act of, you know, building these lineups and analyzing races in this way. And I don't know, I'll still probably watch at least half of the race. I guess that's it. Good luck to everybody tonight. Good luck to everybody in golf over the weekend. And you know what? The great news is we've got NBA coming sooner than later. Just before you know it, they'll be playing those games and maybe baseball. And but in the meanwhile, we got NASCAR, we got MMA, we got golf. And there you go.